Alrighty, 2 Kings chapter 10. All right, so like I said, we've got Jehu. He's been anointed the king of Israel by God's prophet. He's assassinated both Joram, the king of Israel, the descendant of Ahab, as well as Ahaziah, the king of Judah, who was visiting Joram at the time and is assassinated by Jehu, which should trouble us a little bit. Not only that there's yet another dynasty fallen in the northern kingdom, with Omri's dynasty being ended, moving on to another dynasty, sort of that cycle of dynasties in the northern kingdom, but also the king of Judah has just been assassinated. Okay, that's the Davidic line, the covenant kingly line. He's dead too. And 2 Chronicles 22, in reference to Ahaziah in the south in Judah, after he's killed, it says they buried him, for they said he is the grandson of Jehoshaphat who sought the Lord with all his heart. And the house of Ahaziah had no one able to rule the kingdom. We won't get to Judah again in this chapter today. We'll pick up again later, but that's where Judah is at the time. There's no one able to rule the kingdom there. So what's going to happen? It would seem that God's promises hang by a thread for the Davidic line. But here in chapter 10, a spotlight's still on Jehu, mainly in the northern kingdom. And he has been, and he continues to be in this chapter, the instrument of God's just judgment against Ahab and against the idolaters, the Baal worshipers in the northern kingdom. We'll pick up and read 1 through 11. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders, and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab, saying, "Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." But they were exceedingly afraid, and said, "Behold, the two kings could not stand before him. How then can we stand?" So he who was over the palace, and he who was over the city, together with the elders and the guardians, sent to Jehu, saying, "We are your servants, and we will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes." Verse 6, then he wrote to them a second letter, saying, "If you are on my side, and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons. Come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time." Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were bringing them up. And as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets, and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messenger came and told him, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons," he said, "Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until the morning." Then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, "You are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all these? Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah." So Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his great men and his close friends and his priests, until he left him none remaining. We've got 2 letters in the response to those letters here in this first section. The first one is essentially a challenge where he sends a moratorium to the elders of the city, who are described as the ones who are bringing up Ahab's sons. So they were still being cared for, mentored into their royal position, and they were still under the authority of these elders and rulers of the city. And so he presents the challenge, hey, I just killed the king. So, considering you have the king's sons, choose the best of the king's sons, make him king, and prepare to defend your city because here I come. If you're going to follow the line of Ahab and establish another king along that same line, then here I come. Fight for your master's house. And as we've seen sort of in the previous chapter, the tendency of the people is to not resist Jehu. They're just going to follow him, as we saw different military commanders or the eunuchs who threw Jezebel out the window or whatever. As Jehu confronts them, they tend to be like, yeah, we're not that loyal. We'll follow you. You got a chariot and drive furiously. Yeah, you're an intimidating guy, and so we'll follow you. And so the elders of the city do that. Essentially, if you just took out two kings, if two kings could not stand before you, we can't either. We'll do whatever you want. So he responds to them again and says, okay, if you're on my side, then kill the king's sons and bring their heads to me at Jezreel. It's really clear throughout that Jehu knows that he is carrying out, that he's the hand of God to accomplish what God has promised through Elijah, that the house of Ahab will be cut off. At the same time, you get the impression as you go through this chapter, and it's reinforced in another passage that we'll look at briefly, that he's doing the right thing, but he's getting carried away. Okay? And Jehu, it's God's will that he be doing what he's doing in general, but is a decisively flawed human being, not a godly man at all, just an instrument of God's judgment, and he doesn't do it all in a God-honoring way. The Lord is fulfilling what he spoke by Elijah, and it's true. The whole house of Ahab was cursed, and so they're cut off. When you consider these 70 sons, and the fact that they're being raised up by the elders and the guardians in the city of Samaria, we could speculate a little bit, and it's reasonable to assume that no doubt some of those sons were more or less idolatrous than others. In other words, there was probably varying degrees of sin and accountability among that bunch of people. No doubt, some of them were older and more responsible than others. We would expect that some of them were probably even children being raised up in the king's household, in the court of the king. And here they face God's just judgment because he is cutting off the entire house of Ahab. And so it's a really sobering justice that these 70 men would die for the sins of their father Ahab. It's sort of like the conquest of Canaan, where God tells them to go in and slaughter man, woman, and child, where it's just they were an idolatrous people, and this is an idolatrous dynasty, and God has to clean house, but it's also really messy. It's not comfortable, and God's justice is carried out in, like I say, just a messy but righteous way. And while we might be sobered and repulsed by the sin that they committed, that brought about this judgment, we have to be really careful when we come to these accounts that we're not repulsed by God's justice itself, and have to go, if God was carrying this out, and it was according to his will, then it was right and good, and I might see it as messy, not understand it entirely, but the problem is not on God and his justice. If it offends our sensibilities, that's no reason for us to deny God his right to do this and still maintain his perfect holiness in everything that he does. 70 heads in baskets repulses our sensibilities. But God is right and true. At the same time, as I'm thinking about this, like Jehu is a really flawed man, and we must be careful that our, what am I trying to say? that we don't overcorrect and jump on the justice side of things, and our hearts be more inclined toward the violence we see here. Yeah! And forget that when our hearts are inclined that way, our hearts have evil, God's does not. We get out of balance in our sense of justice or vengeance. God does not. And in our world, justice is to be dealt with in an orderly fashion, not in revenge, because our hearts are prone to evil. Even when there's something that must be righteously judged, our hearts are prone to think about that in a twisted way. And yet justice must be carried out in the order that God gives us. Namely, he gives government to carry out justice in realms that we cannot go because our hearts are evil. We have difficulty discerning not only the truth, but what justice actually is. So yeah, we have to guard our hearts in thinking about the justice of God on both directions. If it offends our sensibilities, we must realize that it's not a problem with God. He's still holy. If we start becoming too much of if we develop too much of a bloodlust in how we think, then that's a problem too. Justice has to be carried out actually the way God defines it and the way that he orders it in our world. So yeah, God's justice is carried out. God's justice is really hopeful because not a single injustice will be overlooked in the grand accounting when people stand before God. Nothing will be missed, because that's one of the things that if we are concerned about righteousness that we start to have trouble with and that we can get discouraged by is we see justice is getting missed in all these occasions. Here's a wrong, nothing happened. A person got away with it. I don't feel like I can do anything about it. And we can be overwhelmed by that, and while our human institutions, like government, tries to approximate justice, it is only approximate, and things will get missed. And then in the worst situations, the government's not even doing a very good job approximating it, and a lot gets missed. A lot of justice gets missed, and we fail as human beings to even get close to God's justice. And while we ought to still have those institutions to try to approximate it, our final hope is that perfect justice actually does get resolved by God in the end. That justice before the throne of God is perfect, and vengeance is mine, and he says the Lord, and he will repay. He will sort it out, which is really encouraging when we suffer ourselves or see others dealing with things that they do not deserve or unrighteous men acting against them, that it will be sorted out. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Yeah, I'm glad the one who will deal out ultimate justice will do so perfectly and isn't prone to the same flaws that my heart has in dealing out justice. As I look at the world around me and I go, man, that situation could be dealt with better this way, and this situation could be dealt with better that way. But bottom line, it's actually a good thing that I'm not the guy doing that. And God will cut it straight. He will get it all right. You have any thoughts about that before I move on? I think that's sort of as far as I'm going to go on the issue of justice and judgment here in this chapter. But do you guys have any reflections emerging this morning here?
Just along the lines of what you said, you see things today that there is evil in the world, but God is in charge and he will take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a comfort.
Mm-hmm. We'll go on to Jehu's ongoing retribution here, chapter 12, or verse 12 and onward. Let's just read the rest of the chapter, and then we'll back up a little bit. Verse 12. Then he set out, so that's Jehu again, went to Samaria. On the way, when he was just a second. I think we're all right in my notes. Okay. On the way, when he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah. And he said, "Who are you?" So these are people coming up from the south, visiting up in the north. "Who are you?" And they answered, "We are the relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother," which would be the sons of Jezebel. He said, "Take them alive." And they took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth-eked, 42 persons, and he spared none of them. You start to see that this just he cuts off Ahab's line, which he's supposed to, but it's also starting to turn into a bloody rampage. Okay, and when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him and said to him, "Is your heart true to my heart, as mine is to yours?" And Jehonadab answered, "It is." Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." So he gave him his hand, and Jehu took him up with him into the chariot. And he said, "Come with me, and see my zeal for the Lord." So he had him ride in his chariot. And when he came to Samaria, he struck down all who remained to Ahab in Samaria, till he had wiped them out according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah. Then Jehu assembled all the people, and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers and all his priests, let none be missing. For I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live." But Jehu did it with cunning, in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu ordered, "Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal." So they proclaimed it. And Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. And they entered the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. He said to him who was in charge of the wardrobe, "Bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal." So he brought out the vestments for them. Then Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshippers of Baal, "Search and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal." Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside and said, "The man who allows any of these whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life." So as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the officers, "Go in and strike them down, let not a man escape." So when they put them to the sword, the guard and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. And they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal and burned it. And they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. What's the King James say for a latrine, by the way? A what? A draught house. Okay. I was just curious all of a sudden. Then Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. That is, the golden calves that were in Bethel and in Dan. And the Lord said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel." But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin. In those days the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel, from the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, and the Reubenites, and the Manassites, from Aroer, which is by the valley of Arnon, that is, Gilead, and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. And Jehoahaz his son reigned in his place. The time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. All right, so back to verse 12 again. He's killing everybody, not only those who are part of Ahab's house, but now people connected to Ahaziah from Judah. And as I mentioned, there's sort of a tension in that God's judgment is prophesied. He is carrying out the word of the Lord. God actually commends him near the end of the chapter for doing what he was told to do. And yet, Jehu seems to be taking it too far. And if it doesn't come explicitly out of this text that he's taking it too far, it does come explicitly out of Hosea chapter 1. So you can turn over there really quick. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah. One of the Hosea's right after Daniel. In Hosea chapter 1, verse 4. The Lord speaking through Hosea and gives him a son. And the Lord said to him, Hosea 1:4, the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. Okay, Jezreel is where all the leaders of the city just brought these basketfuls of heads to Jehu. Okay, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel, and on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So here it's prophesied that Jehu will be disciplined, or his house will be disciplined, because of the massacre that happens back here in 2 Kings chapter 10. This is one of those things where the justice of God is thicker than we might first expect. If you just think there was a wicked Ahab that needed to be disciplined, and Jehu did it, therefore Jehu is unrighteous in all his ways, you would be, because God used him, you would be drawing the wrong conclusion. And this happens repeatedly in the Old Testament, even on an international scale. For example, Judah deserves discipline. It's Habakkuk, right, who goes, Lord, how long is all this evil going to be happening in Judah without you judging it? Don't worry, Habakkuk, I'm sending Babylon to judge all that evil. Okay, but they're really bad too. Don't worry, I'll discipline them as well, okay? Just because something is an instrument of God does not mean that that thing is righteous. Okay? Jehu was not, even though this was the Lord's will that the house of Ahab be cut off. Yes, and what he is doing goes further down and is not as transparent to us as we might think that it is. Yeah. There's this other character in verse number 15, Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. Ahab runs into him. He says, hey, is your heart true to me? My heart's true to you. Get up in my chariot. We'll be comrades. Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, is in the family of the Rechabites. Have you ever heard that name before, the Rechabites? They're a really interesting family. In Jeremiah chapter 35, and I'll just summarize. Jeremiah takes the Rechabites, the descendants of this guy, I think it's this guy, Jehonadab. In Jeremiah, he's called Jonadab, so it's got drops a syllable in Jeremiah. But Jeremiah points to the descendants of Jehonadab, and he's prophesying over Judah, and he's saying, okay, look at the Rechabites, the descendants of Jonadab. Jonadab put his family under oath, don't drink wine. And now for generations, they've been obedient to their father to not drink wine. They're a teetotaler family because their dad told them to. And he's going, they have regard for their human father, Jonadab, and they listen to his instructions. You guys aren't even listening to God. So he points to the righteous character in following a human leader, a human patriarch. and pointing the finger at Israel and going, you've got way more accountability than just to a human patriarch. You've got God speaking to you, and you won't even listen to him. And so he holds Judah's feet to the fire with that contrast. The descendants of Jonadab seem to be loyal and godly people in the midst of a disobedient generation. And so it seems like here when we come to 2 Kings, back to that patriarch that Jeremiah will later reference, is this Jehonadab, that he's not wiped out by Jehu. It seems because he's part of the godly remnant and that God preserves his own. And yes, his loyalty was to Jehu and whatnot, but he's not among those who gets slaughtered for any kind of association or of... He doesn't fall to this killing spree of Jehu. Because, again, they seem to be, I heard them described as, they have characteristics of being seed of the woman instead of seed of the serpent. They have a reputation of good character. Jehu continues his killing spree. He's killing all who remain of Ahab, and then he eliminates the prophet of Baal. And he not only annihilates them, but he defiles and desecrates the worship of Baal in Israel, which is what it deserves. He deceives the people by saying, hey, Ahab served Baal a little, I'm going to serve him a lot. Everybody come together. We're going to have a giant idolatrous sacrifice to Baal. He brings in all the prophets of Baal by inviting them to this idolatrous worship service. And then he carefully delineates exactly who the false prophets are. He's very systematic about it. He's like, okay, give them all vestments. Okay, so now all the prophets of Baal are wearing the uniform, so we know which one they are. Okay, and he has them go double check that there's no servants of the Lord in there. And the Baal worship actually takes place. Like they actually go through with the offering even before he sends his guys in there to destroy the worshipers of Baal, which they do. They go in and they strike them down, and not a man escapes. He puts his men under penalty of death to not let anyone escape. And the prophets of Baal are slaughtered. And also the pillar of Baal, it says, is destroyed. Verse 26, they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal and burned it, and they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day, which is the proper response to this idolatrous worship. Baal deserves no respect. Turn it into a septic tank, okay, to show that we revile that idolatrous worship, which is, it's the correct response to this idolatry. There's no toleration of it. There is no respect of it. It's just an abomination, and so it's wiped out and turned into a latrine. You don't toy around with acceptable idolatrous worship. Idolatry is not just a fascinating cultural artifact of either foreign countries, foreign to us, or of civilizations of the past that's how intriguing and fascinating. It's an abomination to God. And hat tip to Jehu for turning it into a latrine. I like that. He didn't make a museum out of it, that's for sure. Jehu's reign, as we read already, is a mixed bag. He continues, he actually never even stops. He just goes right on through with this worship of the golden calves in Bethel and Dan, what's described as the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that first king of the northern kingdom, who set Israel on that trajectory of idolatry, and they just continue on doing it. And yet, because Jehu had done well in wiping out the house of Ahab, God promises him that he'll have 4 generations to sit on the throne of Israel. But with that mixed bag comes the reality in verse 32 that the nation's starting to crumble in concrete ways. They're losing territory. The enemies are starting to give them the squeeze. And it's not just the enemies. Who's doing it? Verse 32, the Lord is cutting off parts of Israel. his judgment, that sort of escalation toward the exile is starting to build. They're starting to lose parts of Israel. Namely, they're losing the part of Israel that is east of the Jordan River. And this is the first part they conquered. This is the part where back under Moses, we took out Og, king of Bashan, and who's the other guy? The king of the Amorites. Anyway, we conquered those back under Moses even before Joshua. This is the oldest territory that they've had. The earliest part of the conquest, and now here they are losing it to, of all people, Hazael, that king who was anointed by under the authority of Elijah and the Elisha and the man of God to be king of Syria. He's the one snipping away the edges of the northern kingdom. From the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, and Manasseh. Jehu dies. He sleeps with his fathers. He's buried in Samaria. And Jehoahaz reigns in his place. Jehu reigned 28 years, so fairly long, a long dynasty. And we'll come back to Judah in chapter number 11. I forgot. Hey, Ryan, could you pull up on the Proclaim real quick? There's one that's a recent slideshow, because I edited it yesterday, that says Sunday school or something like that. This is just for fun. Just go to the first picture. Yeah, that's the one. I didn't change the date on it. But just pull up the first picture. It's a black obelisk, yeah. Yeah, like I said, again, this is just for fun. This is from 841. During this era, as Israel's suffering a lot of incursions and losing property, Shalmaneser III, who was Assyrian, or like pre-Assyrian, attacks Israel, and he put Jehu under tribute. And as I understand it, each of those levels is like a certain king or territory that he conquered in this certain campaign in 841 BC. And go to the next picture. One of those columns is this right here. The guy in the middle is Jehu, put under tribute to Shalmaneser III in 841. And assuming that this is Jehu and not one of his emissaries, because it could be one of his emissaries. The obelisk says, we conquered Jehu and put him under tribute. So we don't know if that character bowing is actually Jehu or one of his emissaries. But assuming it's Jehu, this is the only representation that we have of any king of Israel or of Judah in the ancient records. It's pretty cool. We don't have any picture of David or Solomon or anybody like that, but we've got this one engraving of potentially Jehu. Not in a noble position. He's got a foot on his neck of Shalmaneser, the Assyrian. You can move on there, Ryan. Thank you. The original audience of the kings, you remember that the first readers of Kings would have been the ones who are in the exile. And so as they're reading the book, they're being reminded and encouraged by certain things. They would have been seeing in Jehu and the fact that they were losing land here, their heritage of this increasing guilt that brought about the exile in which they were currently living. Like, they're reading this stuff and going, this is why we are where we are now. And they would have seen that God was in charge of all of it. So this wasn't just a mere human conquest where the Assyrians happened to overpower us, but there's actually divine matters at hand. We disobeyed God. Our kings were idolatrous and led us into idolatry. That's why we are where we are. This is the hand of God that has took us into exile. And they would have seen, as we've already seen today, that God uses crooked sticks like Jehu to enact his judgment. And that is something that the exiles would have needed to take to heart as they are in captivity among evil nations. They're being disciplined by evil nations that, again, like we mentioned, it was God's justice disciplining them, but that doesn't make the evil nation good, or mean that they need to excuse the evil of those nations, or that God is unjust in using an evil nation. He's free and right to do that. And I think, again, that's something that we have to keep in mind. The justice of God is wisely and perfectly dealt out, especially in the long run. But his instruments of justice can come from a lot of different directions, and many of them are not righteous in and of themselves and will face their own consequences for their sin against God. Any further thoughts there as we finish up this chapter? Yes. Yeah. When you have the nations split off, you're correct. This is about 100 years before the full northern exile. When the kingdom split off, and now you have David's dynasty, which does stay secure, even though at this point it seems sketchy. And you have the dynasties in the north, and with just this cycle of dynasties. And their conquest comes in 722, and the southern kingdom is 586. And we're either halfway or over-ish, approximately somewhere in halfway of the northern kingdom from the split until the exile comes. The southern kingdom will endure quite a bit longer and have a lot more kings. The northern kingdom is already on really shaky ground. Yeah. We feel like 100 years is pretty long, and it's not. In ancient history, it really doesn't feel that long. Okay, let's pray. Our God, we're thankful that you're the just judge and you work everything together for your righteous standards to be upheld, for your good purposes to be accomplished. And as we see in our world, justice is only barely approximately carried out. We find great hope that you will fix it. Even as we desire things to be better, ultimately we know that you'll be the one who fixes it. And also, God, we are humbled to acknowledge that you will sometimes use the unrighteous to judge other unrighteous, and that you can use whoever you will in whatever way that you find necessary. You're the king, God, and we are not. Even a nation shaking a fist against you is nothing. And so we thank you that you're the king. May that inform our whole lives, that you are God and we are not. And may that fundamental truth sink into us and be such a foundational part of our worldview that we think more in the way that you have told us to think in your word. Thank you for today and for the gathering of the saints, who you've redeemed and brought to yourself. We give you praise that you've done that and that you've given us a purpose for life and also for gathering together. So may you be honored today. In Jesus' name, amen.